Okay, good morning. So we're up to Reish Ayin Aleph Seif Hey. Says the Mechaber, Shnaim Shoyu Shoisim, there are two people who are sitting and drinking together on Erev Shabbos. V'amru boyev v'nekadesh Kiddush hayom. Let us accept Shabbos. Let us bring on Shabbos. Ne'esa aleim lishleis ad sheikadshu. So once they have declared boyev v'nekadesh, let's bring on Shabbos, then they can't eat any or drink anything until they make Kiddush. V'imrotzu lachsa v'lishleis kodim sheikadshu. And if they want to drink before they make Kiddush, which they shouldn't do, afal pisha einam rishoyim, even though they shouldn't, like we just said, tzrichim lachza v'levarich tchila ber pragofen, v'ach kachishtu, then they need to make a new ber pragofen, and then they would drink. Let's do the Mishnah Berurah on that. So, v'amru boyev v'nekadesh, mayri hacha miba'od yom. We've got to be talking about miba'od yom, before Shkia, in other words, De'ilu b'sofei chashecha, because if it's after Shkia, which is already sofei chashecha, v'chol shkein b'vadei chashecha, and certainly if it's already night, afilu lo amru bo v'nekadesh, even if they don't say anything, mimela chal chovas kiddush v'asa lechol v'lishtes. Shabbos waits for no man, and Shabbos comes automatically, and therefore immediately after Shkia, and certainly when it's already dark, they're not allowed to eat or drink without making Kiddush, or kamesh kos b'sif dalet. So we're talking about basically the time between Plag HaMincha and Shkia. Before Plug, you can't make Shabbos. After Plug, you can, but before Shkia, because after Shkia, it's automatic that you can't drink. So they said, Boyev v'nekadesh, at this point, before Shkia, after Plug, Da'alidei amiras bo nekadesh, chola aleim chayvas Kiddush. Because as soon as they say bo nekadesh, the chiyuv of Kiddush has kicked in, v'nes aleim nishas, and they're forbidden to drink. V'imrotzu, and if they want to drink, even though they're not allowed to, they need to make a new bracha. Hatam says in Mishnah Berurah Chaf Aleph, the aschus da'atayhu milishtais oid kodim kiddush, because once they said boyev v'nekadesh, they've sort of set their mind on no longer drinking before kiddush. V'lochein domel zeh le'omer kodim berachas hamazon havlo nevarich. It's a little bit like a guy says, Rabbi say nevarich, or let's bench. Before benching, so they can't eat anymore because they've sort of been misiach daite. So by
are they Mekabel Shabbos for saying that?
Yeah. Let's be Mekabel Shabbos, and therefore they can't. They've been Mekabel Shabbos, and therefore they can't now drink until they've made Kiddush.
Why does it have to be Shnaim? He can be by himself. Why is that?
He drinks on his own. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. The tzarech hashaisa. Okay, in that situation. Now, regarding the actual Kiddush case, regarding this particular case, because they were sitting drinking till now, they've already made a ber pragofen, whenever it's drinking and they're talking about wine, so therefore, the Magen Avraham says you don't actually have to make a ber pragofen on the Kiddush they're now going to make, because they can be yotze on the bracha they made earlier when they sat to start drinking. They haven't been mesiach das from the drinking, the ber pragofen shabai. And therefore they don't need to make a bracha of ber pragofen on the case that they're going to have after of Kiddush. All they've done is saying, I'm going to stop drinking now. And Lemaisa, since it's all a bit complicated, it's best to avoid this scenario by saying boyev v'nekadesh when they're in the middle of drinking on Erev Shabbos, because you're going to get yourself into a halachic mess. So even though And if the mice of this scenario happened, that means you had two people who were sitting and drinking on Erev Shabbos, drinking wine, and then they say, okay, boy nekadesh, let's be Mekabel Shabbos. Then they've got to stop drinking, and if they want to continue, and if they choose to continue drinking, afal pi she'enam rishoyim, says Rashi, says Mishnah Chof Beis, hainu mitam dechol aleim kedushas hayom, because by saying boy nekadesh, it's already become Shabbos for them. And they so even though they're not allowed to, strichim lachsan, and they're going to make a new ber pragofen. Hainu mitam dechol aleim kedushas hayom, because it was effective, and therefore it's Shabbos now for them. Kosav hataz techesheloi amru boy v'nekadesh ela shehichshech. If they didn't say boy v'nekadesh, but it just got dark, and therefore Shabbos automatically came. Imrotzu lachsa v'lishtais, if they want to continue drinking, ein strichin lachsa v'levorich, they don't need to make a new bracha after also machmas shu kodim kiddush, even though they shouldn't be drinking before kiddush, because their bar pragofen continues. Ha'isa levad ein oisa hesach hadas. And the issa, the prohibition to drink before Kiddush, doesn't itself make the hesach hadas. Okay, continues the Ramah. Adam, we're the Ramah in Hay. Adam sheshach lekadesh ad la'achar shebirch berachas hamotzi. Now this can happen. Yeah, imagine you're Friday night. Everyone's exhausted after a tough week, and you come home and you sing Shalom Aleichem and Eshes Chayil, and you just forget yourself. You wash. The whole mishpacha sit down, and everyone's washing. You're about to make hamotzi. Kiddush. Right? Ever happened to anybody? No. Yeah. So says the Ramah, Adam sheshach lekadesh ad la'achar sheberach berachas hamotzi. He's already said the berachas hamotzi, so now he's in a real pickle because he said berachas hamotzi. So what do? Do you eat the challah? Do you make kiddush? What's the story? V'nizkar kodim she'achal, and he remembers that he's forgotten to make kiddush before he actually eats the hamotzi, the bread, the challah. Yekadesh ala pas v'achach yechal. So you've said berachas hamotzi. What you do is you make kiddush. You make kiddush over the bread, over the challah. But when it comes to havdalah, you should eat first. We'll see in a second. So let's see the Mishnah Berurah. So kodim she'achal, says the Mishnah Berurah Chof Gimel. Hainu kodim she'tam prus hamotzi. That means before he ate from the hamotzi, the challah, tela'achar she'tam yikadesh alayanim yeshla. Because if he made the bracha of hamotzi and then he ate the challah, and someone says, "Hey, you didn't make kiddush." So then you just stand up and make kiddush on the ber gofen, right? So hanu kodim shetam prus hamotzi tela'achar she'tam, because once he's eaten from the challah, yikadesh alayayin im yeshla. You make kiddush on the wine if he has. Mashein kein kodim zeh tzorach lekadesh lapas. But if you've already made hamotzi, then the best thing to do is to make kiddush on pas, afa pisha yesh yain, even though you may have wine. Because otherwise, what's the alternative? To make kiddush then on wine, you've got to say ber pragofen, and that is a hefsek between the birchas hamotzi and the eating of the challah. Therefore, the best thing to do in that situation, if you remember that you have made kiddush after you made hamotzi, before you've eaten from the challah, is just to say kiddush there and then on the pas. Miu tzarich lahavi lefonav oid lechem mishnah. But you should bring another some lechem mishnah. If you just had some bread there and there wasn't lechem mishnah, then you should bring the lechem mishnah there. The zelo mikri hefsek, and that's not considered the hefsek to have a tzorech suda, because that is a tzorech suda which is never considered the hefsek. Uchadil el b'siman kuf samach zayin seif vov. If you look at 34, he says va'af she'enu mevarach atzah birchas hamotzi al lechem hanoisef lemaisa. You made the brach of hamotzi on either a slice of bread or one roll that was there, and you didn't make the bracha of hamotzi on lechem mishnah. So how's it going to help you to bring a second loaf of bread that you've now got hamotzi? Good. So you've got two rolls or two challahs on the front of you, but you're not making hamotzi on lechem mishnah. So he says here, v'imkein b'mei yechoshev k'lechem mishnah. So how's it helping you? Bia hagon v'shlomo zalman arbach. It's not a din in the bracha lechem mishnah. There's a halacha that you should have at the beginning of a Shabbos Suda. There should be lechem mishnah. That your Shabbos meal should begin with two rolls, two challahs, two pita breads, whatever it is. Since you've only made the bracha, but you haven't yet eaten from the bread, it's as if it's the beginning of the Suda. That's how Rabbi Shlomo Zalman understands this halacha. Okay.
I've seen that in there are places when they don't have a lechem mishnah when they make kiddush.
Yeah, but it's not done in the kiddush. Yeah, this is where you've made. Yeah, here you've made hamotzi already.
I'm talking about in a place.
Yeah, that's the point. Is there should be lechem mishnah at the beginning of the meal. That's the point. Yes. Yeah.
But I've seen that in Chabad. I think though. I mean, I've been.
Yeah, what?
They make kiddush. There's no lechem mishnah there.
They make kiddush without lechem mishnah. The halacha is the halacha is just by the way that if it's actually an interesting halacha from memory that if you stand up and make kiddush, and let's say sometimes people like putting the challahs on the hot plate or whatever, they make it a bit crispy or warm or whatever, so they like it and they want to sort of bring it to the table at the very last minute. But sometimes you're standing up and you're making kiddush and there's no challahs there. From memory, once you're standing by the table making kiddush, you shouldn't actually stop to bring the challahs over. They should be ready to go, because the whole thing is that the hamotzi comes first. So to bring them there and say, wait, that's considered a little bit rude, as it were. So either they should be there at the very beginning, under the Chaladekel, and then you make a Kiddush. But if they're not there, then you just go ahead and make Kiddush. I don't think they have to be there at the Kiddush, that's what it's saying. Here we're talking about a situation where you've actually made Hamotzi, and then you need you haven't got Lechem Mishnah there, so just make sure there's Lechem Mishnah at the table, even though you have made Hamotzi. Okay, so what should you do in that scenario? If you remember that you haven't made Kiddush after you made the Hamotzi, before you've eaten, then you Kaddish al Pas. Says the Mishnah Berurah Haftalad, that bracha of Kiddush, you only have to make the bracha of Kiddush, but the actual Vaychulu, that you can do during the meal, after you've eaten. And then you eat. And if you remember after you've eaten a little bit, or bein ksheyesh liyayin umekadesh liyayin kshechayz lechel lezapas ein tzarich levarach shenis hamotzi, because you've already made hamotzi and therefore you don't need to make a new one. Okay, that is talking about Kiddush. Now then the Ramah says the aval b'havdalah, just the very end of Sif Hey, aval b'havdalah yoichel tchila. That means when it comes to havdalah, you made hamotzi and you're about to eat malav malka and you think, hey, I haven't made havdalah yet. So you've made hamotzi and you're about to eat some malava malka hamotzi, some challah or something, and you realize, hey, I didn't make havdalah. Then eat, have something to eat, because the hari ein mavdin ala pas, you can't make havdalah on pas, so you haven't got that eitzah, and therefore you got to eat, and then you make havdalah afterwards. Says Mishnah Berurah Chafvav, yoichal tchila pirush prusas hamotzi, have your piece of bread, kadei shelo tieh bracha levatala, your hamotzi shouldn't be levatala, v'achach tzarich lahavsik v'lahavdil, and then you stop your meal and you make havdalah. V'aymash kosav magen Avram, b'reish sim and reish salites la poskim havdalah d'rabbanon. According to poskim who say havdalah is a drabbanon, ein tzorech lehafsik. You don't actually have to stop. You can continue your meal, and then afterwards eat. Afterwards make havdalah. Elagom misalsav achach mavdil. Okay. So just to summarize, what have we said? A person, two halachas here, three halachas. That if a person, two people are drinking before Shabbos, wine, and they say boyin kadesh, then it's also for them to drink until they make Kiddush. And the Mishnah Berurah says just don't do it because it's too many complications. You're sort of entering a halachic mess. It's better to avoid it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if a person, Friday night, he sings Shalom Aleichem, Eishes Chayil, and he gets home, and then he makes Hamotzi, and thinks, I didn't make Kiddush. So the best thing to do, says the Ramah, is to make Kiddush on the bread, ala pas, and then you say the bracha v'shekichanu, and then you actually eat the bread, and then you say vaychulu afterwards. That's what you do in that situation. But regarding havdalah, you haven't got that option. So if you suddenly come home and you want to go straight to malav malka, you wash and you make bracha hamutz lechem haaretz, and you realize at that point that you have made havdalah, then you can't. You've got no option. You've got to eat the bread, and then you make havdalah afterwards. Do you wait according to the poskim say havdalah is rabbanon? You can actually finish the meal and then make havdalah afterwards. But or just like the Ramah says, you have a bite of the bread and then you make havdalah. Okay, sifov. Now, im gomar sudosoi, if a person was eating and he finished his meal, so this is Erev Shabbos, he was having some sort of meal, and then Kiddush Hayom, it got dark, Kaidem Sheberech Birchas Hamazon, before he managed to bench, all of a sudden it got dark. So what do you do? Says the Mechaber, Mevarech Birchas Hamazon al Kais Rishon, you bench, al Kais Rishon, Va'achach Oimek Kiddush Hayom al Kais Sheni. And then you bring a second case and you make Kiddush on the second case. So the first case is Birchas Hamazon, and the second case is Kiddush. And even though, very strange, even though Lamaisa you're benching and you haven't made Kiddush yet, you say Ritzei in that benching on your Erev Shabbos meal before you've made Kiddush. Says the Ramah, others say, no, you don't make Kiddush. You don't mention Shabbos in Birchas Hamazon, because this meal was a Friday afternoon meal before Shabbos. And that's the Ikar opinion. Commission is by El, so Sim Kuf Beches. Should you drink from the Birchas Hamazon glass of wine before you make Kiddush? Because it's dark now, you shouldn't really drink before Kiddush. And also there's a discussion whether or not you need to eat after you've made Kiddush, or is the meal beforehand considered connected to it. For Yeshemrim, The afig masudasa eno mevarich birchas hamazon tchila. And others say actually not. You don't make birchas hamazon in this situation. If you're having a meal in Erev Shabbos and you don't, then you suddenly it's dark outside and you think, oh my gosh, it's Shabbos. Some say you don't actually make birchas hamazon at all. But what do you do? Ela peiris mapa mekadesh. You just cover over the challahs, cover over the bread. You make kiddush and then mevarich hamotzi. And then you bench as a Shabbos Suda. Says the Rama v'hachi nog lahaitzi es nafshe me pluktus farishena. To avoid the machlekas mentioned earlier, that is the best thing to do in that scenario. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's do it quickly because it's a bit late. Chaf Zayin im gomar sudosei. So a person has a meal on Erev Shabbos. Umayri gamkein kishenot yadav l'may machronim. Moreover, you actually did my machronim v'kedem shehiskal berchas hamazon rosh kiddush elav hayom. And then you suddenly look outside and you say, hey, it's dark, it's Shabbos already. The bezes firle the tchilas mevarich berchas hamazon al kesvishin. So the first opinion is you say berchas hamazon, you finish the meal on the and then you make ber pragofen on the first case. The mekivin shenot yadav tzorich levarich tekef. You've got to bench straight away because you said you've washed my machronim, therefore you've got to bench straight away. But if you didn't do my machronim, then even the first opinion says the best thing to do is to be peris mapa, cover over the challahs and continue the meal, make kiddush. And regarding the ber pragofen in kiddush, if you were drinking wine in the earlier meal, you don't need to make a new ber pragofen because that continues. Even if you said, okay, let's bench, you also need to make kiddush because you didn't actually do my machronim. In that situation, you need to make a new ber pragofen based on kiddush because that means once you've said that, you can't eat or drink anymore, and therefore, if you're going to make a new glass of wine, that requires a new ber pragofen. You can't make kiddush and birchas hamazon on one kais. The ain't ois in mitzvahs chavilas because you don't wrap up the mitzvahs. Shal Shabbos. Now, what does that mean? If you have birchas hamazon, you bench and then you make kiddush later. But in the first case is on birchas hamazon, the second case is on kiddush. But on the benching, which you're doing before you made kiddush, you actually say what say. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chof Tes, Ozdin and Basa Hashta, because right now it's Shabbos. Kim de Beshash Mevarech Kvan is Kaddish Hayom, Umikomak Pasha de Lukula Almim Loi Hizkir Shal Shabbos Eina Chayza. But if you didn't mention it, then you don't have to go back. Okay. Basa Tchilas Hasuda, because you go after the beginning of the meal, Shahoy Bizman Chol, which was on a weekday, because that's the Yesh Omrim now. So Lamed is the Yesh Omrim. The Ramah brings the Eina Maskar Shabbos. In a situation where you're eating before Shabbos and you realize, oh my gosh, it's Shabbos now, and you bench, you don't mention Shabbos. Why? Because you go boss at the beginning of the meal, which was not Shabbos yet. So Mikol Malkum Pasha de Lukula Almem Lo Hiskish Shabbos Eina Chayze. Sorry, I missed the line. Lamed again, Sif Cotton Lamed, Boss at Tchilas Hasuda, Shahoy Bizman Chol, which was started during the day, during the week. The Chol Zed Dafka Kishlei Ochal Mishachashechem Umma. That's only if you didn't eat after dark. But if you ate something after dark, then for sure you have to mention Shabbos in your birchas hamazon. Im Yitayim, Lamed Aleph, what is this going on? Yeah, v'yesh machleikas im Yitayim mikosha birchas hamazon. So in this situation, when you make birchas hamazon, you've got then the case of wine on birchas hamazon, there's a machleikas whether you should drink from that wine. Why? What's this for? What's the machleikas? Says in Mishnah Berurah Lamed Aleph, the istis v'relu d'mevarech ber pragofen v'tayim tekef k'mei b'chol kosher birchas hamazon. Some say, yeah, well, that's what you do after you make a ber pragofen, you drink it. It's not considered drinking before Kiddush, because it was going on a meal which kicked in, which began before you even had a chiyuv of Kiddush. And in that situation, you only make the bracha of Hashekit and not Bebragofen at Kiddush. The istisfirlu, and the other opinion is and you should not drink from that case because you can't drink before Kiddush. And therefore you can't make Bebragofen. And al case shall Kiddush or Mekadesh v'shesei. And therefore you make a bracha of Hagofen on the Kiddush, and then you drink that. And then you can drink the kosher birchas hamazon without a bracha because you've just made a ber pragofen. Okay, that was that. And then, still in that shitta, we said there's also a machlekas whether or not you need to eat a little bit after Kiddush, Kiddush Makom Suda. The Yeshemrim, there are those who say, well, you just eaten a whole meal, and therefore that's cool to have a Kiddush Makom Suda v'shavin tzarech lechel. The Yeshemrim, they didn't actually Makom Suda because that meal was a Friday afternoon meal. So there's debate whether you need to eat after in this situation. The Yeshemrim, now that's a new opinion. And that, then Mechaber brings the Yeshemrim, and that is in a situation where you ate on Friday afternoon, and suddenly you realize it's Shabbos. Just be Peiris Mapam Makadosh and do not make Birchas Hamazon. Just sort of bring it into the Shabbos meal, and then just stand up and make Kiddush. V'Yeshemrim. Says the Mishnah Lamed Gimel, the Sfir Lahu, the Al Karcha Tzarech Lechel Miyad Ach Kiddush Kiddush Yenechshav L'Makom Suda. This opinion holds that you've got to eat after you've made Kiddush because it's got to be considered the Kiddush Makom Suda. The Suda She'acham Mitchila Eina Me'il Lezeh, because the previous eating doesn't help you. The Kivin Al Karcha Tzarech Lechel, and since you've got to eat post Kiddush, Birchas Hamazon She'men Time normally. Why are you making a Birchas Hamazon in between? The Dinner Kamam Makadosh Be'emsa Sudosa Niskalel She'Peres Makadosh, and therefore you should be Peres Makadosh or Makadosh Bir Mavarech Hamotzi. And therefore you just stand up, you make Kiddush, and then you make Hamotzi. Now, it's not the same as we said previously that you don't need to make Hamotzi. The Hachashani here is different. Here we're talking about a situation where you did my Machronim, and you therefore sort of terminated that eating. Therefore you've got to not only make Hamotzi, but also Ber Pragofen. You're not Yaitse on the prior Ber Pragofen that you had as part of this meal earlier on. But if you didn't do my Machronim, then it's different. Okay. You should eat a little bit. At least a kazayis, so that meal post Kiddush is considered Mokum Suda. Okay, and therefore, and then the Ramah finishes off and says V'hachi nahug, that this is the preferred course of action, and you actually Paris Mapam Makadosh, and that's what you should do. Says the Mishnah Berurah Lamed Zayin Lamed Vav Ahainu de Imyasek Kader Rishona Yipul B'Sveikas, because if you go after the first opinion, then you're going to get in a whole big, you're going to enter a whole bunch of sveikas. Im Lahaska Shabbos, do you mention Shabbos? V'im Yitzim Mekos Berachos Mozon, do you drink the wine? V'im Tzarech Lechel Ach Kiddush, could you eat after Kiddush? So there's a whole bunch of problems, and therefore the best thing is to be in Peres Mapam Kaddish. After Ate in Yetzi, they're Rishayna, Tzisril and Tzarech Levarach Berachos Mozon Yad, and even though, according to the opinion, that you're not Yetzi with Berachos Hamazon straight away, this is better. This is a better course of action. So in short, Rabbi Yisai, the best thing to do is not to have big meals in Erev Shabbos. That's the best thing to do. But if you do, then the preferred course of action, if it goes into Shabbos, is not to bench, but to be Peres Mapam Makadosh, cover over the Chalas, and then go straight into Kiddush. Okay.